So I saw last month, April 2025, this new biography of Robert Crumb is coming out and pretty long too, although a lot of it's endnotes. But I'm a big Crumb fan, especially his prime period from about 64, 65 to early 70s, 72, 73 when he had his burnout, uh, which, all his periods are covered in this book, but that's my most like favorite period just because his art's wonderful in other periods after that, but his storytelling in that period is just so out of control and off the wall because he was doing a lot of acid and marijuana and just constantly doing as much as he could. And there's just so much innovation. I've said numerous times too that I think him and Jack Kirby, although Kirby was not doing any drugs as far as I know, but both of them were at the top of their game in the late 60s, early 70s, and very different styles. But I think they were the most influential artists of that period in any medium. Well, no, any visual artist, uh, including fine arts, which I think popular arts were much more relevant to most people and had bigger influence and were just more interesting. So I was eager to read the book. I've read through the complete Crumb comics and that set. But actually, I realized after reading this, though, there's a lot of material that I haven't read, like his later period, although I have read a good amount, like his Book of Genesis and so on. So, but there's so much. He did so many sketchbooks, so many little comics and things that I've not gotten to that I now really want to get to. This is not a book I would say for starting to read Crumb. This is you should at least read some of his more classic material before you read this, and probably also see the famous documentary just called Crumb that came out in the '90s, because that there's a lot of visual people. I mean, people that you can see, whereas this is just a name usually and a brief description. It just helps you to understand it. So I would not go into this book cold, but if you are a big Crumb fan, I think this book is essential. You got to read it. It's not perfect, and when I first started reading it in the beginning, the first sections, like a lot of biographies, will touch on kind of family history, his ancestors, and a lot of those people are just names, and they don't really mean anything for a lot of the book until you get to more characters that show up in the Crumb biography, and then you can actually put a face to them and see what's going on. So I did not like that early section, but as soon as we start getting into more like the 50s and the 60s, it gets more interesting, and it really in the late 60s, I think that's when the most interesting stuff happens. I think also it's at its best when it's not focusing so much on like what was happening, which is interesting too, and obviously provides context. But I think it's just more interesting to here Crumb. I mean, this is an authorized biography, by the way. Crumb lives in France, and Dan Nadel, I think, went a few times to France to first initially to ask him to do the book, and then to they communicated a lot, and they did a tour actually in the U.S. And I don't know, it may still be going on, but I wish I had been able to go and see Crumb. That would have been amazing, but I'm not in the U.S. anymore.
Comic world is a scruffy little orphan compared to the
Right.
fine art world. The money, the wealth, and
Yeah.
and most of that art, the art that they do.
There's a good video online I would recommend if you are. To me, like any interviews with Crumb are always fascinating. The more you learn about him, the more interesting it is because so much of his work is like James Joyce, another artist who I've talked about a lot on my channel. He really his work really feeds on his own life and affects his own life in this really kind of Ouroboros type of way. And the way that fame just descended on Crumb really affected his entire life. And the fact that now he gets shown in art galleries and makes the Book of Genesis, I think he made like millions off of that from the artwork, the contract, and it's just fascinating. So Crumb also has this, this hypersensitivity to his own position and the weirdness of his life and how that moment of when he was doing all of these drugs and making all these comics really affected the rest of his life. And he's also like has this like self-loathing kind of strain. Yeah. Anyway, so I was fascinated to learn about all that and hear about it all, and I learned a lot that I even having read all I have already of Crumb. I learned more, and it just to me it's like Joyce. It's the more you learn, the more fascinating it becomes. So not a perfect book, not a perfect human being, but really just a incredible like you feel the weight of his life throughout the like all the people, all these characters, like from the independent artist, from his family, from his wife and other girlfriends, like all these influences just bleed into his stories and his life, and so many contradictions and paradoxes. Like he was a guy who didn't like a lot of the 60s counterculture, didn't like the music. He's always been more into like these old timey 1920s type music. And but he also embraced his fame, and sometimes he could not stand people, but sometimes he would just like use his fame to manipulate people in some ways. So and that but he also got disgusted with himself by that. So just hearing all these stories and all these the convoluted state of his mind is just utterly fascinating. And yeah, so I enjoyed it. And if I think if you like Crumb, you got to read this book, just like you got to see the Crumb documentary. I also recently watched The Confessions of Robert Crumb, which was okay. I think Crumb. I'm going to rewatch the Crumb documentary because I think that's a little better. And then I watched the first Fritz the Cat movie, which was I don't know, it was whatever. But Crumb didn't like that movie. He basically just did it to the money. And then there was a second Fritz the Cat movie, which I haven't seen, but yeah, so I think even people that don't like haven't read his comics know like some of the characters like Fritz the Cat or Mr. Natural. They know Keep on Truckin', that image, and other things like the Fritz the Cat movie maybe. And it's just incredible his influence. He's like I think he must be like one of the key figures of the 1960s, in my mind, anyway. So, I think if you're curious at all about that history, I mean, Dan Nadel said that he was like interested in kind of writing a history of the underground movement, and he just kind of used Crumb as this kind of force to channel that and touch on these other things as well. But I think that's not necessarily totally accurate because it is essentially Crumb's story, and there's a lot after the independent comics, like in the 90s and 2000s and stuff although the 2000 period, he does tend to breeze over that, although it could be because I read that part of the book faster. I don't know. But yeah, so either way, check out the book. It's pretty interesting and not perfect, but still very fascinating book.